Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm very happy to see so many friendly faces and interesting faces, even though it is summertime outside. And as Felicia already mentioned, probably many people prefer to go to the lake. But no, you are here and we are looking forward to an interesting talk today. Professor Dr. Felicia Loecherbach is here from the University of Amsterdam. It is a special honor for me to introduce her to you because I just figured that I know Felicia now for nearly 10 years. Because nearly 10 years ago, she was a bachelor student at the University of Erfurt, and she did her thesis already on something that devoted empirical and innovative methods and data analytical approaches. It was about opinion leadership and how features of opinion leadership on social media are perceived by people and how this alters their perception of news. What still remains in a way is the broad interest in political communication on social media. For the last 10 years, Felicia therefore was investigating that research field with a specific love, I would say, for the method and specifically the computational methods in that. And this is something you will see in her presentation for sure. But after this historical introduction, let me tell you what Felicia does at the moment. She is an assistant professor of political communication and journalism at the University of Amsterdam, the famous ESCR, so to say. She's also a research affiliate at the Center for Social Media and Politics at New York University, where she did a visiting scholarship during the last years. She has published in leading journals such as Journalism, Digital Journalism, or Internet Policy Review. And she is also devoting her time to serve the community. Specifically, she is the secretary of the Computational Methods Division of the International Communication Association. And he also is in the editorial board of the established journal Computational Communication Research. And this aspiration for computational method is also what her teaching is about. She's teaching a number of advanced method classes, not only, but also in Python and sometimes even R, maybe still, I don't know.
50-50, yeah.
50-50.
Doesn't matter.
And as she just mentioned, she probably knows most or is one of the persons who knows most about data donation. And this is also what her talk is about. It's titled Inside the Feed, Data Donation and Political Behavior on Social Media. This is a very innovative topic. In our class, we just did a literature review on news reception on social media and analyzed articles from 2010 to today. And we found that only 3% of all articles use data donation. But now you can learn more about it and maybe even try it out. The stage is yours, Felicia, and you all please give a big applause to our guest.
Great. Well, thanks, Stefanie, for the nice historical introduction. She also failed to mention that she was my supervisor in my bachelor thesis back in the days. As already said, I really like to work on sort of two things. On the one hand, computational methods, and on the other hand, I really just want to know what people are doing on social media, what they are doing on their phone, how do they get their information, how do they get their news. And once you sort of get to that topic, you realize that most people use this for it, by now, but they also might be using tablets, they might be using laptops, they might be using their Alexa, their fridge might tell them the news. So actually getting inside the feed or getting inside what people are seeing is kind of a difficult thing. So first question is, why is this so hard? Why do we find it so difficult to understand, well, who gets what information, which sort of seems like a very basic question? Well, again, can anyone reliably tell me what they did on their phone yesterday? And, be as specific as possible. What apps did you use? What order did you use them in? Was any of it related to news and politics? And probably most of you can tell me that they used their phone and also sort of roughly what they did, but that is about it. And if we're thinking about media effects, that might just not cut it. And as a media effects scholar, I also often want to know not just yesterday, but I want to know last week, I want to know last month. Like I want to get a good overview of what's happening because people tend to forget it within the split second. Probably most people couldn't answer this about the last hour or the last minute. And the problem is, so I actually at some point just stopped updating this meme because it's been staying basically the same for the last 10 years. Sort of trying to make sense of any of this has gotten very, very complicated. But the problem is that we should care about it because what political information you see and what might remain hidden has important consequences. It shows you which voices feel loud to you and which voices feel fringe to you. And it also tells you what does feel normal to you, what does feel true to you, what does feel urgent to you. And sort of those of you maybe work in the field might immediately relate this to some of the big theories that we have that are around opinion formation, about voting, about trust. And the problem is that by now media use is super fast, it's fragmented, it's half remembered. So what we used to do was always doing a survey that asked, what newspaper do you read? How many days do you read this newspaper? What TV channels do you watch? And then if we got very advanced, we looked up what was in the newspaper the last few days, and we sort of tried to triangulate what you probably looked at. And that was about it. And I think we had a good 4 to 5 decades of media research. Very happy with this. Next thing is it's personalized. So no two feeds are alike, as we know. Algorithms mean that your experience can actually be very different from another one's experience. And increasingly, or already for the last 5 to 6 years, I'd say it's basically a complete black box. So if you have apps or semi-private spaces, then basically as a researcher, you have very few options. So I just heard about a project that Cornelius and his team were doing where they sort of used a company that actually tracks phones using accessibility features of Android. So basically for people who normally need someone to read their screen to you. So you can use these features to sort of understand what's happening on a phone, but those only work on a particular type of phone. They only work for particular types of apps, etc., etc. So it gets like really complicated to really match what's happening. And turns out platforms don't really want to give researchers their data for some reason. And if they do, which sometimes they do in very big, splashy collaborations, then there's usually a lot of questions, conditions attached to it, and questions around independence. Does Facebook really like all the things that you find on their platform? Probably not. And then, of course, also what you find might on your phone often be mixed with private information. So where you find your news might be on WhatsApp. Well, no one wants to give you all their WhatsApp, right? So sort of how do we deal with this? Even if I could, for some technical reason, just track everyone's phone, I think our university ethics committee might have a thing or two to think about there. Why do I care about this so much? Because I want to research a particular topic. So what I want to research is news diversity. And the thing is, I want to know if people are getting a varied, balanced picture of the world. And the problem is that this sort of travels down a whole chain. So what you start with is what is being supplied up here. So this used to be that you look at what is in all the newspapers that we have, right? You just want to know what is the possibility of information that someone could have looked at. So this would be the diversity of our media system. That already got way harder because try archiving the whole internet. There's people who tried, they are currently being blocked. If you heard anything about the Internet Archive. But then there's also something called exposure diversity. So this came up around the 90s, which was more, okay, but then what particular part of the media environment is someone looking at? Because no one can read all the newspapers. No one can look at all of the internet. An additional layer that you have basically only, well, that you can only work with if you have trace data is consumption diversity. So this would be that, for example, you have your whole feed, you have a whole TikTok feed, and there's millions of videos, but then there's actually only a few that you decide to actually look at, that you decide to select. You go on a news website, there's 20 articles, you only decide to click on one or two of those. So all of a sudden, we can actually track those patterns and sort of disentangle between what you're being exposed to and what you consume. And then ultimately, and I'll get to that sort of more in the last part, perceived diversity. So how does this actually shape what you think about the media system, whether you think the media system is biased, whether you think that you're being fed valid and varied information in the media system. But the thing is, so I basically have given up on ever mapping the whole supply that is on platforms. I'm very happy that other colleagues are taking care of that. I so far focused a lot on these parts, and this is also what the method of data donation is very good for. But I'm also increasingly concerned about the gap that sort of starts in between here. And this is sort of what then the last part will point towards. So, but now, data donation or Datenspende, you might have heard about this in the German context before. It actually sort of had a little bit of popularity because the colleagues at the Weizenbaum did like a very big campaign around the last elections. I think it was called Deine Wahl, dein Feed. So they basically just worked with media companies and had a lot of people donate their TikTok data to them. So what is it? Very simple. So we started toying around with this in 2017, 2018. And we had a reason of starting then, because that was when the GDPR regulation came into effect, the General Data Protection Regulation. I think it's related to German DSGVO. And if you might remember from a few years back, at that point, most people just complained, sort of companies complained about how this is making their life so much harder, how they can get sued about everything. But it turns out that it actually also has quite some nice effects, and those are for researchers. Because the GDPR has an article that gives every person the right to download all personal data that a company has on them, or to request it from the company. I don't know if anyone here has ever tried doing that. It can actually be quite fun. So the first time I did this was with my YouTube data, and I could look at my YouTube history going back to 2008, I think. Hilarious to look at. I had forgotten basically all of it and all the weird videos I watched as a teenager. But basically what this means is that you usually can download your data, inspect it, and then choose to donate it to a researcher. So you can do this with any type of major company that's out there. So we thought, hey, can we not just use this to basically get a trace of all the personal data that someone has left on a website? And turns out you can. And by now, after, as I said, like 8-9 years, we built quite a lot of different infrastructure. So there's a group in Amsterdam who's very active. There's also one in Switzerland and some German groups who are working on this as well. And basically just built a whole infrastructure that takes care of sort of the nitty-gritty technical details that are actually attached to it. because obviously the data doesn't come in a format that you can just open on your laptop and take a look and you immediately know what's going on. Doesn't work like that, sadly. It just needs to be machine readable, not human readable. So we started out with just, having people upload it into some form, but that wasn't very useful. So now we have a whole infrastructure that visualizes the data to people, that sort of processes in the right way. So how this works is that we actually first talk to people and we ask them whether, we are allowed to do this as you would with any type of study. They then download their trace data from the platform, which usually should be pretty easy to do. In practice, it's of course not, and it can sometimes take a while to download the data, but usually it should be fine. It downloads it to their own device, and then it gets processed locally. So what I mean by that is that we, for example, do studies with WhatsApp. And as I said, nobody would want to give us their whole WhatsApp. Also, we wouldn't want them to give us their whole WhatsApp. Like, I don't want to read your WhatsApp. I only want to extract certain things from your WhatsApp. For example, if you shared an article to a news website. So what we're doing is basically that in this tool, it's being locally processed to only extract the things that we are interested in before it gets donated to the researcher. And that's sort of very crucial because it sort of puts a step in between the full raw data of everything you've done on the platform versus what we actually want to have as researchers, can then inspect this and then give this to the researcher. So for example, this is like a little bit of an older interface, but it still is basically what this works. How this works. So you gather the data in a first step. For example, in this case, you get your data from Google. Then in your Google data, there's a couple different things. So for example, your YouTube watch history, your search history, your browsing history, and you can click on those and then you get various visualizations of what this looks like. You can delete part of the data that you don't feel comfortable in sharing, which by the way, no one ever does. Very confusing. And then ultimately you can decide to actually donate the data to the researcher. I've used this, I think, by now for every platform. So for example, browsing histories of people, YouTube histories around elections, TikTok of teens, which was quite interesting. We only had 100 of them and got 23 million videos. They do love to watch TikTok. So yeah, we basically had like 250,000 impressions of videos that went past people's feed. And then first had to figure out what to do with this because it was way more data than anticipated. And just recently, also around data elections, because we have a lot of them, so there's always data to collect, we got ChatGPT chats. So we actually had, sort of 250-ish donors who, donated whatever they discuss with a chatbot to us to be ready to analyze it going on. But I've also done this with Facebook, WhatsApp, Spotify, LinkedIn, and I probably forgot about 4 to 5 other platforms. And that's all really cool. For example, you can then find what everyone else has found so far, but with more data. For example, that most people don't care about news. But what you can also do is take this offline, and this was actually one of the most rewarding experiences we had so far. I don't know if anyone knows what Lowlands is. Maybe you've heard of it. It's a very big music festival in the Netherlands. It's very popular. And what Lowlands does is Lowland science. So you can go there and you can have your little booth and then do science with people on the festival. So this is prik je eigen bubbel door. If you're German, you might understand what that means. It's burst your own bubble. So we basically sort of built this on the whole filter bubble idea. And we went there and just asked people for their Google and YouTube data. And turned out they loved giving it to us. Never had that before. And very funny, we actually had to sort of keep them from bringing their friends over to show them all of their private data. So like everyone wanted to show other people. It was basically like a Spotify Wrapped type situation, just with your Google and your YouTube data. And turns out basically like if you do this face-to-face, then you get people who normally don't do your online studies, who normally don't trust you, who are not very interested in this. And they really enjoyed it. And also we weren't allowed to pay them, actually. We just gave them like little fake tattoos that represented how they watch YouTube or something, and everyone went wild for it. So that worked really well. Because normally what happens is that we do those data donation studies online, and then they are, to put it very mildly, an absolute pain. Because think about it, like I showed you the whole process of what someone is supposed to do. So you're a participant, you're taking an online survey, you normally just click through the things, or by now probably a little bot does that for you. And now all of a sudden you're being asked to go to a platform, to click through 4 menus, because obviously this is not on the front page of Facebook telling you how to get your data. You're downloading some file to your laptop, then we hope that you know where your downloads folder is, which 99% of people do not know. We ask you to upload it to a platform. We ask you to inspect your data. We ask you to donate this to us. So you can maybe imagine that we lose some people along the way, and sadly we systematically lose them. So in the online part of the study, so we basically compared the festival versus an online study, we went from 9,500 people who started to 430 who actually gave us their data. And as per usual, it's younger people, they are highly educated, they are more male, they are more trusting, etc., etc. And usually they tell us it's about time and effort. I mean, they're being paid more than usual, but still. And that it's about technical barriers. So not knowing where your downloads folder is, these types of situations. And usually this is sort of similar to what we can see in other online studies. So that's a little bit sort of that data donation is a very cool method that is very transparent, that is very participant oriented, but it also often actually requires being more creative in how and where you collect the data. So it's probably not going to be just an online click and you're done, but it might require actually going into the field, talking to people, going to events, these types of things, to really sort of also just build trust with people, because they are trusting you with something that is very detailed, that is very private. Okay, but I actually don't want to the whole time just talk about the method and how we're collecting the data, but more about something that's been concerning me for a few years now, because we were so concerned with whether we could collect the data that we didn't think about what to do with it once we have it, kind of type situation, which turns out is even more complicated than getting the data, because sort of the promise was always, if it works, we get a complete record of everything that anyone has done. We can profile them. We can know everything there is about them. So we get every visit, every video, every message. We know everything about them. And we get it detailed over a long period of time and at the level of the individual. So I have some people of which I have the last 14 years of their browsing history, for example. But then you're sitting in the analysis, and all of a sudden I'm not quite sure what this actually tells me about that person and what this tells me about the things that I'm interested in. The thing is, sort of the things that we already know from the past few years is that, for example, what I often get from this data is a click, it's an impression. But of course, that can mean anything. Like if you think about your own social media behavior, if you clicked on something or whether you stayed on something a little bit longer, did this always actually mean something? Did this always leave an impression in your mind? Did this affect your attitudes? Time spent could be that you were really engaged watching that YouTube video, or it might just be that you were cooking and you left the phone on the side and was just running. Most of what you scroll past on certain platforms, be it Instagram, be it TikTok, whatever, is seen but not actually noticed. And sort of most what's noticed just doesn't leave a trace at all. It's probably not on your phone, but somewhere outside with a person that you're talking to. So basically, seeing doesn't mean noticing, doesn't mean being affected. And that's where I sort of come back to this one here. Because as I said, what we can do with these methods is definitely do exposure. So I can, with the teenagers, I get a trace of all the 250,000 videos that they have seen across their phone in the last 5 years. I can, to some extent, get consumption diversity, which, for example, would be, are they staying longer on the video? Are they, I think it's called favoriting a video. I don't think they call it liking. I don't know. Did they share it? Did they comment on it? So I can sort of track a little bit whether they try to more actively engage with it. But what I do not get with this method is perception. So I don't really get what are they thinking about, for example, how a certain topic is being represented on TikTok to them. How does this affect their attitude towards that topic? And why am I so concerned about this? So this is about a project that's actually already from a few years back, but where we had a result that I never actually did anything with because I didn't know what to do about it. So a few years back, I built a news website because I basically wanted to be the one who makes the trace data. So like who makes the platform, and I want to be controlling what people are seeing, and I want to be controlling what they are thinking about it. So basically being in charge of the whole website. And there it was about sort of news and news diversity and how it develops over time. So like one group just got completely random topics shown. One group had what we dubbed the filter bubble algorithm. So it was essentially like if you clicked on sports, you kept seeing more sports over time, and we made it like a very dumb algorithm. So it really narrowed the things that you're seeing on your feed. We basically made it the algorithm that everyone's so afraid of. And then we also did self-selection so that you could say, I'm more of a sports person, I would like to see more sports. So, and we just wanted to sort of compare what's happening there. And we had people use it for 2 weeks so that there's actually enough time for the algorithm to adapt to what they're doing. And then afterwards, we asked them a lot of questions that were also related to sort of how diverse do they think the platform is regarding certain characteristics, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, because I made the website, I knew exactly what they were seeing and why they were seeing certain things. And then I put those together, and like, I don't want to make it a statistics lecture, but essentially, sort of, this is how people perceived it. And this is the measures that we applied. And we applied like a lot of different measures, how you would normally measure diversity. And what you would normally want to see is that they both sort of work together, and then you get a line like this. What we get is a line that is essentially this, and also sort of all those statistics to it, which basically means pure randomness. Like there's no correlation whatsoever, and it is especially pronounced for our little filter bubble algorithm. So you can see that sort of for some people, this really reduced the diversity of what they were seeing, and for some people, it actually increased it because they were looking at diverse things. So then the algorithm reacted to them and made it more diverse. But then you ask them about their experience, nothing. And that is, at least to me, a problem. But as I said, sort of back then, I looked at it and I was like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't know how I feel about it. Does it just mean that however we compute diversity is wrong, or like what does this actually mean that people do not notice at all? So what I am now more interested in and more getting into, and also getting into here at my time at the Zemke, is to combine the two. So to have the traces, which does give us scale, right? The last 9 years of your traces, granularity, that are objective, however you want to call it, that are a record of what happened. So that basically tell us the things that people cannot remember if they have seen it. but on the other hand, to also really tap more into experiences, into what people noticed, how it felt, what they think shaped them, sort of like how they interact with the platform and what it does with them. And sort of part of this is, on the one hand, the graph that I just showed you, which clearly showed me sort of if I'm now computing all types of things with these diversity measures that we have, but then people never notice it. What does that mean? Why should we care sort of that there's a difference? But also just whenever I told people what my PhD is about, I at some point was like, yeah, it's about diversity on social media, etc. And then the one term that everyone knew was actually filter bubbles. Everyone somehow has heard about this term. Whenever I then told them, we cannot empirically find them. No matter what we do, we cannot find them. Everyone immediately disagreed with me. Every single person was like, no, but I am in a filter bubble. Like, I definitely know they exist. Like, I can see it every day and I can see it with all of my friends. I can see it with my parents. And at some point I was like, is this now a similar thing? Is this just like because we're not understanding or like capturing the experiences with the trace data? Or is this because we're looking wrong? So I think this is sort of like a similar problem. And the question sort of that I sometimes get from colleagues is, well, but why should I care how people perceive diversity? Especially the computational colleagues very much so sometimes get at me for that. And I do think there's actually a few things that are related to sort of the big discussions that we are having also as a society at large. On the one hand, it might be, and I had a lot of discussion about this, that in the news experiment that I showed you, we of course never sort of trap people completely in, because that would be pointless, right? We never only gave them sports. There was always some type of diversity. So the question is it maybe that people only actively start noticing it once they feel actually trapped? That sort of as long as it's kind of medium-ish diversity and there's something to choose from, they are fine. So maybe as researchers, sort of caring about these tiny little differences that we are measuring when we are measuring feeds is something that people don't actually care about, and sort of figuring out when this alarm goes off, where people have the feeling, hey, there's something wrong in my media diet, and how individually this works is something that I think is quite interesting to figure out. And the second thing is that sort of experiencing a lack of diversity can sort of lead to the feeling of being underinformed or boxed in. And this sounds very abstract, but those are the people who think all the media are biased. I'm going to search for my own information, right? So sort of once you start experiencing a bias or a lack of diversity, you start seeking out alternatives, and this might sometimes be worse alternatives, as we know about a lot of very alternative media. They might feel trapped in the bubble. They might actually avoid news or news media because they have the feeling that it's not providing them with what they need. Or, of course, you also have those very classic people who wrongly assume that they probably know enough. So they have been on a social media website, they keep seeing the same thing. They're like, okay, probably that is all there is to know about what's going on in the world, and they just decide to call it a day. So basically, like, the bias against me, I think, is the most visible symptom that we have, but there's sort of a lot of other things that might be going on in sort of having a gap between us saying, hey, it's all fine, we can't find it in the data, and people still insisting that there is evil going on. And yeah, part of this is also that the data we might have might, in addition to everything, be wrong. So we also ask people about their browsing history, whether they actually recognize their browsing history as their own. Turned out most people don't really. And the question is, why is that? Is it because we just forget what we did online? Or is it maybe also I always call it the Spotify Wrapped when having small kids phenomenon, So all the people with small kids who get their Spotify Wrapped usually recognize not much of it as their own, because other people have been using their devices as well. There have been a lot of other things going on. So this is one thing. It might just be that the difference is because our data is wrong, but of course it might also just be that there's different things going on. So I basically want to tap a little bit more into when and why does perceived diversity actually matter and what could affect it. So what is it when you go on a website, what actually affects how you assess that it is giving you balanced and diverse information, and then hopefully doing a connection. So there's some of my colleagues in Amsterdam who, for example, have worked on this and actually combining good old school qualitative work with traces. So confronting people with traces or with particular parts of their traces and actually asking them questions about it. And the interesting thing is, of course, that I'm then not trying to say one of them is perfectly right and the other one is wrong. It's more sort of in the combination of things we might be figuring out sort of what part of the data should we actually focus on more, or should we sort of always have some kind of sanity checks where we give people parts of their data to calibrate how for an individual this works, just to be able to sort of use both worlds so that we don't have to ask people in a survey what they did on their phone, but that we basically on a different level do not think that just because we have a lot of rows of data, we suddenly know how a platform affects a person. So yeah, I guess ultimately it boils down to how much do we trust what we measure. So I started into this, I remember at the beginning of my PhD and being like, now I can track all of it. Now I don't actually need to ask people because people are super unreliable and they never know what they're doing. And it's all very terrible. And now I have the hard data and I'm currently sort of swinging back on the pendulum to being like, hey, but actually it might just not be as easy as that. So you could say that at least to some regard, the feed is kind of legible, but then that isn't all there is to it. And ultimately, no one actually processes the whole feed and no one looks at all of it. And it goes through the brain first before it actually affects all kinds of different attitudes. So data donation, yeah, it can be the door, but then you do need some mixed methods, which is going to be an interesting experience for me. So far being mostly computational, very quantitative, to actually embrace the other side. So it's going to be really cool. That's it.